Hi, guys. I am so excited. Thank you for joining us again today. And I have with me today my friend Heather, which we met in the Smoky Mountains. I mean, it's a really gorgeous way to meet somebody and at a retreat looking at the mountains. And God had our paths cross. And I wanted to invite her here today, and I wanted you guys to get to know her story because she is a mental health counselor. And one of the things that she's been doing is using the creative arts and art ministry in a non faith based environment, which is something that can be kind of challenging at times. So, before we get into that, I wanted her to introduce herself. Heather, why don't you just tell us just a little bit about you as a person and where you live, and then we'll get started.
Sure. So I'm Heather White, and I am a mental health counselor in Maryville, Tennessee, is where I am. So,
Beautiful. And so, how long have you been a mental health counselor, and what do you do that? I think you do that at college, correct, or university?
yes, so I have been a counselor about 12 years. And before that, I was a sign language interpreter. I work in a community college here in town. And so it is um, not a Christian school, but I am a Christian. So I kind of approach everything maybe on the down low, but from a faith based perspective.
Which I love. And that is, I'm really glad that you brought that up because so many times when people think about ministry, you think about, oh, I'm doing something full time, or I'm doing it with a church, or the name Jesus is right out on the front of it. And that's not, it's not that that's not who you are, but that's not the space that God has called you into and to use the creative arts. So backing up just a moment, will you tell me? I know you're an artist yourself. Um, will you tell me when you first started using art with your job, your career, and when did you start seeing that? Because you're not an art therapist, but when did you first start seeing that connection?
So that started about 3 years ago when I was actually at Eagle Rock where we met, but it was before that. Basically, I've always been a creative all my life, and I've been a Christian, but I never, until that point, I never recognized that they were one and the same. I was in a presentation there, and someone said, what does Genesis 1:1 say? In the beginning, God created, and I almost fell out of my chair. I was like, oh my goodness, because it's always been something separate in my mind. And I realized that it was actually one and the same. And so I kind of started to explore that and pray about it and say, what does that mean for me? And I realized that I am actually my calling is to be a creative counselor, not just a counselor. And so I came back from that retreat and I went to my boss thinking she's going to laugh me off of, the chair. And I said, so I've had some changes happen and this is really where I want to head with our students. What do you think? And she said, that sounds amazing. And I just about fell out of my chair for that reason. And I said, okay. And she said, by all means, bring in whatever you feel like you want to bring in. That's great. So my goal eventually is to do private practice doing this as a creative counselor. So it is kind of art therapy, but I do it right now, not exclusively. It's kind of as it calls for it and things like that. So yeah.
I love it. And so beautiful that they were open to that. That's not always the case, as we know.
No,
Sometimes you
definitely not.
right. That's a hard space sometimes to convince people that the creative arts is helpful for so many different things. And it can be really powerful and unlocking the deeper things going on inside it. I know you've done a couple really cool things with some of your clients and some of the students that you have, and they're all kind of different from each other. Will you tell us? I love it, but that's so good. It's not just, well, we do this. So what are some of the things that you've used with some of the clients that you have seen, We know God's working, even though you don't get to talk about it all the time. How have you seen God work in some of the things that you're doing?
So there have been several different, I probably do, I would say maybe 5 or 6 different things depending on the student. But the ones that I guess really are the ones that seem to be the most, mm, I don't want to say popular, that sounds weird, but like the ones that students really tend to gravitate toward the most would be one of them is I do, for students that are dealing with self esteem issues, for example, we do Morse code jewelry. And so they make bracelets that with a message for them that no one knows.
Wow.
And then that way they can take it and wear it. And they know, and these are actually my own that I have that I wear every day and have worn for years. But it's very helpful for them and I will see them kind of play with it sometimes, and it's a really good reminder. So that is one thing. And then another thing that I do in the picture I will send, but I work with students painting, and they do. Um, this came from I also help lead creative retreats at my church, and so at my church we were discussing all of these um, different things, and we started talking about spirals and how a spiral means you're coming home, and we were talking about Aboriginal art and how they do a lot of dot art. And so I came home and I started really thinking and praying about that. And I made a creation myself that took me probably 3 months to do. It's very large, but I sat down and I wrote down all of the people in the last 15 years that I have lost in my life and really had time to meditate on each of them. And then I painted a picture that has each one of them is represented by a spiral. The size of the spiral is how much of an impact it had on me, and the colors match my feeling of that person. And so have had several students that have also done that. I have one right now in the middle of it. We've been working on it for a couple months, and she's had a lot of loss in her life. And so she comes in, and I have all the paint out and everything. And every week she gets one done, but while she's making that spiral and she talks about that situation and and kind of what that felt like, and we process that loss for her, and she says it has been so helpful. And I know for me it was so cathartic, it was so healing to be able to really do that. And the thing that I think I like, I won't say the most because I think it's amazing, but I think one thing that I really like is that they get to take these things home and they get to have them. And so they can see and remember, everyone else that sees it doesn't know the intent behind it or what it means or anything, but they do. And then the other thing is I do a lot of weaving your grief with my students. And so this is an example of one that I did, but I do mine a little bit different. We have a place here in our town that has free stuff. So I go and I pray over what I need to get, and I pick different materials and ribbons and all kinds of things. And then I just have a huge, like 31 bag, one of those really big containers full of all of this stuff. And my students, we sit down and I ask the questions. And first, I, of course, pray over the questions. And let me back up and say, because it's not a Christian school, I can't really talk about it being about Jesus, but I will usually say to them, when you come in to do this, identify who your higher power is. And of course, I'm praying all the time that that's Jesus. And then because, we talk about how it's woven together, and you can't really talk about that if you don't mention who's weaving it together. And I've had a couple students that have actually said, "Oh, it's my best friend." Okay, that's I just pray. But basically they choose whatever. And it's so interesting to me because whenever I go in to pick up more material or ribbon or, you know, yarn or whatever, I always pray, Lord, show me what I need to get. And some of the strangest pieces, I remember one of them was airplanes, and I thought that's so weird, but okay. So I got it, and one of the students said, "Oh, this reminds me of my father, and da da da, da. And like it was so healing for her. So it's just interesting to me how it can be used, So
Let's
um,
talk about that for a second, because I think that's a really good point that you brought up. That you can't you mentioned you can't necessarily overtly talk about Jesus or God being the one that weaves it together, but you have ahead of time spent time praying, God, would
yes.
you show me what pieces to bring in because you know their hearts. So how has that been for you? Something that is so integral and woven into part, faith is so much a part of what you do creatively, but you can't necessarily speak about that in the environment. So I heard you talk a little bit about you pray about it ahead of time. Has that been challenging at all? To do you feel like you're missing a part of it? You know,
I mean, of course. So I have, I do have some students that have told me they're believers. And so with those students, it's a lot easier because I can be fully transparent about what we're doing. And so, yes, I mean, it's always better to be able to be fully transparent. But in the situations where I can't, I just, I just keep it's so funny because it's like I almost have a mantra that goes through my head so much when I'm working with my clients, which is you just need Jesus. Like there's so many times that in my head it's like scrolling in my brain. And so I just pray. That's all I can do is pray. I can't, I can't say, did you know, that will get me fired. And so even though I live in the Bible Belt, that will still get me fired. So it can be a little frustrating. It can be a little bit um, complicated, or give me pause at times. But I think that I just have to learn to keep a poker face, and I can be praying the whole time, and often with the questions they'll change based on what someone has said. The Lord will say, nope, don't say that one, or yes, say this one, or whatever. And so another thing that I do is when they're done and they can take it with them, I send them a list of the questions to help them remember what those questions were and how those, and so there's a lot of prayer that goes into it because, I can't say, but he knows and he can. And so, um, but it can be a little frustrating sometimes.
absolutely, but I think you and you know this, you're part of their story, which means that we know that God is part of their story. And sometimes that's just the beginning of a conversation, that you're
Yes.
beginning conversation and asking questions that God has put on your heart. That will he knows what unlocks each heart, and he knows at what stage of the healing journey everybody's on. And so
For
I'm
sure.
really thankful that I'm sure it can be really discouraging. It is discouraging sometimes knowing, oh, I know what would fully heal, but not everyone's ready for that either.
Right.
And so I love how you have figured out how to integrate art ministry without not calling it art ministry in
Right.
context you're in, which is, and it sounds like I think other people in your sphere of influence have recognized, hey, maybe this is doing something, and they are not all believers.
Right. Exactly. Yes. And so I always love when I'm in a safe place and someone can say, why is that? And I can share more. But yeah, a lot of times I can't. And so I just keep remembering that he is so much bigger than I am. And so if I'm just planting a little seed, you know what? That's okay. That's enough. And it's interesting to me because oftentimes people will come back to me later and they'll say, I I realized, that there must be something out there, or whatever. So I think it's doing a good thing for sure. And if nothing else, I mean, at the least, it's helping them be able to process the grief that they're dealing with. Or, I really focus a lot with my clients on anxiety, grief, and trauma. And so, we all have, I think I can safely say we all have at least one of those somewhere going on in our story. And so, that just seems to be that's what serves my clients best. And so that's how I can use those things to do that.
So how would you encourage somebody that maybe feels called to do some kind of creative ministry? Maybe it's connected to their job, maybe it's not, and they aren't in a faith-based environment. How would you encourage them, even steps to take, or what would you tell them to do? What advice would you give them?
Well, the basis of everything for me really is prayer. Because if I try to keep it in my own self, I'm just going to get frustrated and either say something I shouldn't say or, step out of line some way. And that's not going to help anybody. So, I mean, I just stay in constant prayer while I'm doing it. Like, just that, I'm just constantly like, okay, what's my next step? What's my next step? What's my next step? Because it isn't about me. It's about the Lord most of all, and it's also about helping a person in my world, helping a person be able to process trauma and grief and deal with anxiety and deal with all these things that especially my population is not all um, young adult, like early 20s ish, but a lot of it is. And so I've done a lot of research on the different generations, and so that helps me too because I know sort of how they're confronting the world, which is different than the way I confronted the world, and so that helps me to be able to kind of move my move my discussion with them in a way that hopefully they'll hear better. Um, but I think prayer is just is the most important thing, and just being like, for me, I just have to get out of my own way. Really, that's been my life. Is I tend to be a little bit of a control freak. I tend to be a little bit of a planner, and so I can tell you plan A, B, and C. But I've had to learn through this creative journey that that doesn't work. I have to just sit back and go, all right, tell me what I'm doing and I'll do it. And it's crazy how it's like grown and things are happening and it's super cool, but it's not me at all. It's really just sitting back and going, all right, what are we doing today? I kind of every day I kind of start it with, all right, Lord, what are we doing today? Who are we talking to today?
The hot mess club. Yeah, we've talked
Yes, I am the president.
early, the best parties are the hot mess parties where we don't come with it all together. And honestly, just going, God, I don't know what this is going to look like, but this is what I'm bringing to the table. And let's, let's see if we
Yes.
love other people today. So I want to talk to you for just a minute. I want to switch gears for a second because you mentioned that, there are always new doors opening. But I want to talk to you about a door that for you opened a long time ago that God is kind of reopening and bringing to the table, called Established Hands. I think, is that right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Established Hands, and you have been an interpreter. I love the heart that God has given both you and your husband. You've seen a need. You saw that there was a need in the community that you were a part of, and you guys have responded to that. And so, what are you doing to respond to the need of the interpreter community?
Interpreting is a very unique a unique career because so much of a person gets wrapped up in the job, and it's important to remember that you are not your job. And so there are a lot of people that deal with feeling like an imposter or feeling like they are not doing the job well, or they have a bad situation where someone either gets upset with them or even could die, or there's so many things that can happen because as an interpreter you step into someone else's life all the time, and that doesn't come without those vicarious scars that hit you because you're becoming another person a lot. And so we have been in the process of using some of these same techniques to set up some workshops for interpreters so that they can start to deal with those issues too. Because we have seen that in established hands, we have just seen such a need for um, positive mental health for interpreters too. And so it just sort of all falls hand in hand.
I love how God has integrated your lives, both with your jobs, the things that you're passionate about, the things that you've been a part of, the communities that you're naturally a part of. And I think it's such a really important thing to remember, that while, yes, sometimes God has a step way outside of our comfort zone, often there's so many needs right in the middle of what's currently right around us, and being
Mhm.
open and going, oh, you know what, I recognize a need in this space. How can I help use the gifts that God has given to meet those needs? And I think that's exactly what you guys are doing, is you're seeing the gifts that you've both been given. You're looking at a an emotional and mental, and even physical sometimes, need that you're seeing, and you're going, how can I be part of the healing process there? So I think that's such a beautiful example of full integration. Um, and so thank
I
you.
tend to look at the world pretty holistically anyway. I'm just kind of that sort of person. And no, not and, but to me, like I said, until about 3 years ago, it was very separate in my world. I love to paint. I love to do prophetic art for people. I love to do all those things, which were super cool. I think maybe they didn't. I don't know, but I did. Um, and then I had my job and I had my belief system and I had, and it was like, it just floored me when I went, wait a minute. I'm all about being holistic, but I'm not being holistic because it's all together. It's all one thing.
How would you encourage somebody that is feeling pretty compartmentalized? Their life feels kind of segregated. It feels like, I'm doing this over here. I kind of want to do this art thing. And it's just not fitting together. It doesn't feel holistic. How would you encourage somebody that they might think they want their life to feel that way, but it's just not, and they can't find a way to find that common space? Is there any way that you would encourage them?
Literally, I would say get away for a while with Jesus. And that may sound really like, okay, take a silent retreat, go to the mountains, go for a drive, go to a hotel room for a night, whatever you need to do. And just invite him to say, okay, I want this all to be me. And I know you've made me this way. You've given me these gifts. You've given me this drive. So how do I turn this into something that's all connected? So I think that there are ways that you can really integrate all of that into pretty much anything, even if it's just, I'm a business person and I want to set up hey, let's all meet together and let's do some creating together, or I mean, it could take on a lot of different
A lot of different forms.
possibilities.
Yeah. And I thank you for mentioning that and saying that. It's so true and so good, because sometimes we do have these preconceived ideas of, oh, I have this on my heart. I have to start up this whole big new thing, right? I have to begin an art ministry. I have to begin an outreach program. I have to reinvent the wheel, really. And sometimes it's just taking one small practical little step of saying, okay, the people I work with during our lunch break, hey, would you want to go do this creative thing with me? Maybe it's just one person. And that's great advice, great wisdom, even specifically getting away and asking Jesus, how can I integrate my life so I don't feel, so many people feel pulled in 10 different directions? And I think God has more for us than that. Not more things to do, but
Not necessarily, no.
no, but just a way to see all these things begin to touch each other, so that we
Mhm.
feel a little bit more like this is God's in all of these spaces. He's using these things together. And so thank you. That's a really, really good word. Um, well, Heather, this has been a blessing, and I love getting to talk with you and hearing your heart. So is there anything else that you'd want to share before we finish our time today?
Um, Probably the only other thing I would say is if you're called to do it, you're going to end up doing it. So don't run. When God says do it, even though it may scare the snot out of you, it did me. Do it because it's been really cool to watch and just to kind of, and we partner together and it's, yeah. So, yeah, that's probably the only other thing I would say.
Amen. Well, yes, 100%. I love that you said, if he's called you to do it, just go ahead and say yes now. Stop fighting. Let's just do this thing. So,
Yeah.
Heather, thank you so much. It's such a gift to hear your heart and have you share it with us. And
Thank
I know
you.
that so many people will be blessed by your story. So we bless you in the spaces that God has called you
It's
to.
an honor.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us for another session of Blank Canvases and stories of people being called into art ministry all around the world. Blessings, and we hope you join us again. Don't forget to check out createdministry.com for resources, tips, and ways that you can be trained in art ministry as well.